So I believe we just have urinary, and we're going to talk about acid-base balance, electrolyte balance, and then we're going to talk about reproductive and then pregnancy. That's kind of the rest of the quarter. Question?
Are we still having a quiz on Monday?
No, we'll have a quiz on Wednesday.
Okay. And then will it just be on Wednesdays for the rest of the quarter?
Probably. Yeah. Okay, so we are going to talk about the urinary system today, and some of this is a little bit of review because oftentimes what the urinary system does is it interacts with other systems. And so specifically when we talked about the circulatory system, we talked about blood volume, and that is one function of the urinary system, is to help regulate the volume of blood. It also functions to filter things from the blood, and you'll remember that it also helps to regulate the production of erythrocytes, or red blood cells. So if we list some of those things, right, it helps to regulate blood volume. And blood pressure. So one of the things that it produces is a chemical called renin. And renin is an enzyme that helps to convert angiotensinogen to angiotensin, so it will ultimately cause vasoconstriction. We're going to talk about the significance of that, because in order for the kidney to do its job, it has to have a relatively constant blood pressure, because the reason why the blood is filtered is because of the blood pressure going into the specialized capillaries that filter the blood of nitrogenous wastes and other chemicals. So that blood pressure and the idea of vasoconstriction will be important when we talk about the regulation of filtration by the kidneys, for example. It also helps to regulate blood pH, and specifically long-term pH acid or acid-base balance. One of the other things that it does is it produces EPO. Does anybody remember what EPO stands for? Or what it does? Erythropoiesis, or poietin, right? So it's erythropoietin. And this functions in regulating red blood cell production. Poietin. How do you spell poietin? Poietin? I think that's how you spell it. I think that's an E, not an R. Should be erythropoietin. Okay. It also filters nitrogenous wastes, drugs, and some toxins from the blood. So the breakdown of what type of macronutrient produces nitrogenous waste. Anybody remember? What do we break down that produces lots of nitrogenous waste?
Is it protein?
Protein, excellent. So protein has those amino acids, and the amine group is like a nitrogen group on it, right? And so when you use protein and you break it down in the liver, for example, if you were in starvation mode, you would actually produce more nitrogenous waste, right? And you'd actually have to get rid of that nitrogenous waste, which would be in the form of urea in the urine, by excreting more water. So you actually kind of dilute the nitrogenous waste in your urine to get rid of it. Okay, so these are some of the things that the urinary system does. And if we look at the structure, I gave you a little diagram. So when we did the fetal pig dissection, we noticed that the kidneys were way back in the back of the body cavity. I'll show you a picture of that in a second. And so they're actually under the lining of the peritoneum. So to get the kidney out, you had to have kind of actually cut into it, right? And if we look at this, there's a gland that sits right on top of the kidney. Does anybody remember what that is? These are the adrenal glands. And they are endocrine glands that produce hormones. They also produce steroids, so they are the source of testosterone and estrogen, as well as the gonads, the ovaries and the testes, okay? And then if we look at the blood vessels, what's this big blood vessel here that's blue? Is it the aorta or is that the vena cava? Vena cava, and it's actually the inferior vena cava. So that is carrying blood back to the heart. And then this would be the abdominal aorta. Oops, abdominal. Okay. So what do you think these vessels that are carrying blood to the kidney and away from the kidney called? Renal, right? So this would be the red one, which is kind of underneath the blue one, is called the renal artery. And the blue one is called the renal vein. And they are carrying blood to the kidneys so that the blood can be filtered. When the filtration has been formed and urine has been formed, then it is carried via this duct. And this is what is referred to as the ureter. And you'll notice that there's two of them. And then this connects to the bladder. And so the bladder is where urine is stored, right? Sometimes we can get bladder infection that then travels up the ureter and can actually lead to kidney infections, which can be a really bad thing that can cause the kidneys to shut down in extreme cases. It can make you very sick. This is a female, and so this very small duct is the urethra. And so this carries urine out through the urethral orifice, which is separate from the reproductive and digestive openings. So I didn't give you this diagram, but I wanted to show it to you because this shows the position of the kidneys in the back of the body. So this is actually the peritoneal cavity with all of the digestive organs removed. Okay, so notice that it actually sits behind that membrane. And so it doesn't really sit in a fluid-filled space, but rather than fluid around the kidneys is we have a fat capsule. So the fat capsule, or the renal capsule, surrounds the kidney. And you remember that this is pretty low in the back region. So it's in the lumbar part of the, actually goes from like the bottom of your thoracic vertebrae down to your L3 vertebrae. Okay. And what this does is it provides cushions. So it cushions, right? And it also holds the kidneys in place. So if this fat capsule, for whatever reason, say for example, if you don't have enough nutrients, so you're starving, and you start to break down that fat to use it for energy, that sometimes happens, the visceral fat. And so what would happen is that the kidney is going to fall. And this leads to the falling of the kidney without the fat, leads to what is called renal ptosis. This is where the kidney falls. And this can actually cause the ureter to kink. So it can cause. And then what happens is that the urine cannot go from the kidney to the bladder, so it starts to back up. So the urine backs up into the kidney, and that is what is referred to as hydronephrosis. So hydronephrosis. nephrosis. We're going to talk about what nephros means, or nephron, right? This is water, so this is where the urine backs up. Okay, so we do have, in some instances, we can get the infection of the kidney, and this is called pyelonephrosis. And I think pyelo means fire. And so this causes, if you've ever had a kidney infection, it causes a big fever. And so you get really, really feverish with it. And so this is a kidney infection due to bacteria getting into the kidney from the urinary tract. So it could come up through the ureter into the bladder, and then it can go up the urethra into the bladder, and then it can go up to the ureters, and then into the kidneys and cause infection. So sometimes kidneys can get damaged by crushing accidents or being kicked in the back of the body. So you can see here that crushing, like if you had a big blow to the back of your body, how that would damage the kidneys because of their special location. Okay, so you have another picture which shows the kidney. And when we look at the kidney, it has a characteristic kidney bean shape, right, in us. It's not that way in other organisms. Like if you're looking at the kidney of the frog or a fish, it's just a long kind of band of tissue. So this is mammalian structure of the kidney. And so this space right here is called the renal hilum.
The space between the kidney and the vein?
No, that kind of, just that opening. So if I was to draw this, kind of, oh, that's not a very good picture of a kidney bean, like this, that would be the renal hilum. Okay, so that's just that space. Sometimes it's called the hilus. So hilum would be, which one would be plural and which one would be singular? I'm not sure. Hilus, hilus. I think the renal hilus is the plural one. Anyway, so that's the renal hilum. And so that's where the blood vessels and the ureter go into the kidney, right? So that's, and you also have lymphatic vessels that also are transported into the kidney. Okay. So this thinner vessel would be the renal vein. This thicker vessel would be the renal artery. This is the ureter. So the tube that drains the urine from the kidney. Now this space right here, where all the urine is going to eventually drain into the ureter, that is what is referred to as the renal pelvis. The outer part of the kidney, like in other organs, like in the adrenal gland, for example, is called the cortex. So this outer part is called the cortex. So this is the renal cortex. And so what do you think the inner part is? Like if you're thinking about the adrenal gland, what was the inside part of the adrenal gland called? Medulla. Okay. So this inner part, and specifically this part right here, kind of like all the way around, right? This is called the renal medulla. Okay, and you can see histologically when you look at it, you can see the difference between the types of tissues. And so this is specifically called the renal pyramid. So that is part of the renal medulla, right? And so the renal medulla with the renal pyramids. And we're going to talk about what that is. Those are actually the collecting ducts of the functional unit of the kidney called the nephron. Okay, and then we have these little openings right here, and so the urine is produced and it kind of drips into here. And so this is called a calyx, and since it's a small one, this is called the minor calyx. And then where a bunch of calyxes come together, like right here, this is called the major calyx. So urine is kind of just dripping from those renal pyramids, and then they come out through the minor and then out through the major, and then into the renal pelvis, and then they drip into the ureter. And so that's just a duct that is going to slowly fill the bladder with urine. Okay. So I wanted to talk about the way that the blood enters the kidney to be filtered. So this is the blood to be filtered. And I'm going to simplify it from what is described in your book. So I'll show you a diagram in your book, but we're just going to pay attention to these particular parts of it. Okay, so we have the renal artery coming in. And it is going to branch into smaller and smaller vessels. Okay, so I'm just going to, you don't need to know what those small vessels are, until it comes into a small arteriole, which is called the afferent arteriole. So remember, A comes before E. So it's kind of like afferent pathway in homeostasis and the efferent pathway in homeostasis, right? So afferent arteriole, and then it goes into a specialized capillary called the glomerulus. So this is a specialized capillary. And fluid gets filtered out, and then the blood that does not get filtered out, so hopefully you don't have blood in your urine unless you've damaged your kidneys, that generally doesn't happen. So then it goes to the efferent arteriole. Now notice, for some reason in this capillary, there's not a venule. So there's two arterioles, afferent and efferent, okay? So then from here, it goes into some specialized capillaries called the peritubular capillaries. It's tubular. And what is called the vasa recta. And then it goes and gets picked back up by bigger and bigger vessels. Maybe I'll draw my vessels bigger. And it goes out through the renal venule. Not vein, renal vein, not venule. Okay. So essentially, this is where filtration is produced. Okay, so the filtrate is produced here. So filtration actually occurs there. And this is where, what? In the glomerulus, yep. And then this is where good stuff gets picked back up. So this is where reabsorption, so that would be good stuff getting picked back up, and secretion occur. So that would be stuff that didn't get forced out is then going to be put into the urine. So when we look at the kidney, it produces about 180 liters of filtrate. So I'm going to put 180 liters of filtrate a day. Okay, that is not our urine because the urine has to be modified. So the urine that is produced after reabsorption and secretion is only 1.8 liters. So 1.8 liters of urine is typically produced per day?
Yeah.
Which class?
There's some handouts. I'll give you your midterms at the end. So you're not distracted.
Seriously.
Yeah.
I need to do the waiting for 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay, so looking at the diagram, it shows the circulation. This is in its more complicated form, okay? So aorta, renal artery, you can skip out off all those. They get smaller and smaller and smaller branches. And the glomerulus, we're going to find out, actually are located in the cortical part of the kidney, okay? So that's where the filtration takes place, is in the cortex. And then the reabsorption of water specifically takes place in the medulla, with these specifically in the renal pyramids. Okay, so nephrons, don't get confused with nephron and neuron, right? Nephron, nephritis, right? That would be infection of the kidney. Nephrons are the functional unit of the kidney. So they have a glomerulus, and this is a specialized fenestrated capillaries. So fenestrated capillaries are the most permeable capillaries in our body. Most of our capillaries are not this type of capillary. But they also have, along with the fenestrated capillaries, they have specialized cells called podocytes. And the podocytes actually are feet-like cells. They have cytoplasmic extensions, and they actually help to prevent good stuff from getting into the filtrate, right? So these function in filtrate formation. Now, around the glomerulus is what is called the renal capsule. This has also been given the name the Bowman's capsule after the person that discovered it. And the renal capsule captures the filtrate. These two things together make up what is called a renal corpuscle. So a renal body, corpuscle means body, is the glomerulus and the Bowman's or the renal capsule together. Okay.
Renal, what is?
That's corpuscle, C-O-R-P-U-S-C-L-E. Okay, so if we look at a diagram here, this would be my renal corpuscle, the whole thing. So we have the renal, or actually they call it the glomerular capsule. Sorry. It used to being called the Bowman's capsule. So this is glomerular. So instead of renal capsule, it's the glomerular capsule. That makes more sense anyway. Okay. So notice that the afferent arterial is carrying blood in, the efferent arterial is carrying blood out, and then notice this is where the filtrate is going to go. Okay. So after the renal corpuscle, we then have a series of tubules. And these tubules are based upon, their name of them are based upon their proximity to the glomerulus. So remember that proximal means closer, distal means further away. Okay. So we also have what is called the proximal convoluted tubule. Then we have the loop of Henle, which we'll talk about. Henle is the name of the person who discovered it. And then we have the distal convoluted tubule. And these all connect up to a collecting duct. And this collecting duct connects eventually to the renal pelvis of the kidney. Okay. So in your book, you'll see proximal convoluted tubule, abbreviated PCT. Distal convoluted tubule is the DCT. And then loop of Henle is not abbreviated. Okay. So that's the structure of the nephrons you need to be able to identify. Okay. So if we look at this diagram from your book, right, the loop of Henle is a long part of the tubule that extends down into the medulla. So most of what is going on here, it occurs up here in the cortex. So filtration occurs in the cortex. This is the proximal, the distal convoluted tubule, and then these are the collecting ducts. And notice that there's more nephrons attached to this collecting duct than just a single one. Okay, so we have two types of nephrons. We have what are called cortical nephrons, and these make up the vast majority of our nephrons. So these are about 85% of the thousands of nephrons in our kidney. And they have a short loop of Henle. Many animals only have cortical nephrons, but as mammals, we have another type, which is called the juxtamedullary nephron. So juxta means next to. So this is next to the medulla, and so this makes up about 15% of our neurons, and these have very long loops of Henle. And this is responsible for the production of very concentrated urine, because it's in those loops of Henle where we have the reabsorption of water, responsible for very concentrated urine. So this urine would actually be hyperosmotic compared to our tissues. And really, mammals are the only creatures that are able to produce hyperosmotic urine. And that means that we can conserve water very well. Okay. So in your diagram, if you turn it over.
Did that say hyperosmotic compared to tissues?
Yes. Okay, so this is a cortical nephron. This one is the juxtamedullary. Now, when we're looking at it, you have to kind of follow the trace of the way that the blood is flowing and the way that the filtrate is flowing. So notice that this is blood coming right into the glomerulus. So what arterial would that be? Would this one be? Afferent, right? So this is my afferent arterial. Sometimes the starboard just won't let me write big arterial. Okay.
What's the round red?
This is the glomerulus.
So the little red thing going into the glomerulus is the afferent artery?
Yes, so it goes into the glomerulus. The efferent would be coming out, right? And so when it comes out, sometimes it goes around the tubules, like in this one. So this one right here, notice that it is coming out of the glomerulus, right? So this would be the efferent artery. What kind of capillaries do you think these are that are surrounding the proximal and distal tubules? The fenestrated capillaries are inside the glomerulus. So these are the peritubular capillaries. Right? So you can see here that they surround the tubule, right? And so stuff that shouldn't be in our filtrates can be taken back up and put back into the circulatory system. So even though we produce 180 liters of filtrate, we're only going to produce 1.8 liters of urine because a lot of stuff is going to be taken back up. Okay. So this one right here, this is the vasa recta. And it specifically surrounds that long loop of Henle. So here I can draw and I can point to the actual loop here, not the capillary. And that would be the loop of Henle. And then if I go backwards and I follow what tubule is taking stuff into the loop of Henle, right? This would be the PCT because it is delivering stuff to the loop of Henle. And then from the loop of Henle, coming back up, would be my DCT. So proximal and distal convoluted tubules. So it's showing the flow of blood here, but also the flow of filtrate as the filtrate comes down and then back up. So this is actually an electron microscope slide showing those specialized glomeruli, right? Those specialized fenestrated capillaries. Oops. And then if we look at the glomerulus itself, right? These are the fenestrated capillaries, and then on the fenestrated capillaries are the podocytes. And so it's the fenestrated capillary and the podocytes that create the filtration membrane through which the filtrate is formed from the blood. Okay, so we can talk about the glomerular filtration, and this is really important because it tells us whether or not the kidney is functioning properly or not. So we can talk about what is called the GFR. So this is the glomerular filtration rate. And so this is the amount of filtrate that is produced. And so it can be measured at about 125 milliliters of filtrate per minute. Okay, so this is for the kidney, the whole kidney. Okay, so filtration rate depends upon hydrostatic pressure. So this also depends upon blood pressure. So if your blood pressure is too low, then you're not going to have enough hydrostatic pressure and your glomerular filtration rate is going to decrease. So if you decrease the BP, your blood pressure, you're going to get a decrease in the GFR. So this is why the kidney actually participates in, or why I believe the kidney participates in the regulation of systemic blood pressure, as well as blood pressure coming into the glomerulus. Okay. We also have at the other side the osmotic pressure, right? So the osmotic pressure has to do with the sucking of the fluid back in, right? And so this is due to solute concentrations in the blood that cause water and other substances to be taken back up by the capillary. Okay. So there's a balance between osmotic pressure and hydrostatic pressure that keeps fluid moving into the nephrons of the kidneys. Okay. So let's look at maintenance of GFR. We have what is referred to as renal autoregulation. So what that means is the kidney itself can regulate the filtration rate at the glomerulus. So it's not regulated by the nervous system and it's not regulated by hormones, but it's regulated right by the kidney. And the first one is the myogenic mechanism. And this actually occurs in most blood vessels, right? So stretching of the blood vessel actually causes constriction, right? So myo means muscle, genic means generating. So stretching of the blood vessels like the afferent arteriole. Okay, so when the afferent arteriole constricts, this is going to decrease blood flow. So this is going to decrease the GFR. So let's say your GFR is too high, you have too much blood coming into the glomerulus. If there's too much blood, you could potentially damage your kidneys, like you can blow out your filtration membranes, right? So you want to keep the blood pressure from being too high, but also if it is too low. So if GFR is too low, right, it can cause arterioles, the arteriole will dilate, right? And this will increase blood flow. And this will increase your glomerular filtration rate. Okay. And you guys actually have a PhysioX that kind of plays around with this, manipulating the variables of the diameter of the blood vessels and the formation of filtrate. Okay. We also have what is called the tubuloglomerular feedback mechanism. Tubuloglomerular feedback mechanism. Okay. This has to do with receptors that reside right by the nephrons, and they reside in what is called the juxtaglomerular apparatus. So we have receptors, and these are called the macula densa. These are receptor cells, right, that reside in the juxtaglomerular, so not medullary. So we saw juxtamedullary, but this is glomerular apparatus. So this means that It is a sensory structure in this apparatus next to the glomerulus. Okay. And this detects salt concentrations in the filtrate. Now, we don't want to lose a lot of salt in our urine. So if there is too much salt, that means in the filtrate, that means that our filtrate is being produced at too high of a rate for us to sufficiently reabsorb the salt back into our body. And so what this does is this actually causes constriction of the arteriole and decreases GFR, okay, if NaCl is, running out of room, too high. Okay. So this one actually always causes constriction. If NaCl is not too high in the filtrate, then it just doesn't do anything, right? It doesn't cause the arterioles to constrict. So this is just looking at solutes in the filtrate and saying, oh, there's too many solutes in the filtrate. That means that we're producing too much filtrate. That means that we can't reabsorb fast enough. And so that means that we're going to be losing precious things, including maybe even glucose, out through our urine. So reabsorption cannot occur fast enough. Okay. So let's look at a diagram that shows that. Okay. So this is my juxtaglomerulus apparatus right here. And you can see that these are the macula densa cells right here. Right? So they're really close to the afferent, which is on the bottom, and the efferent arteriole. Okay. So that they can detect, you'll notice this is the loop of Henle right here, right? So they can detect this would be filled with filtrate. And if these cells say, oh, there's too much salt in your filtrate, we need to shut down your filtration rate so that we can reabsorb those ions, then that will cause constriction of this afferent arteriole. So this just shows the sensory structure right here, which detects internal stimuli, which helps to regulate the filtration rate. This is actually a better picture showing the glomerulus and the fenestrated capillaries, and then these are the podocytes that create that filtration barrier. So the podocytes don't let cells, for example, you don't want white blood cells in your urine. If you have white blood cells in your urine, what is that a sign of? Infection, right? Your urine is actually sterile. So if they go in and if you pee in the cup, right, and it looks cloudy, they're like, oh, you have a urinary tract infection because you have microbes in your urine, right? And that generally doesn't happen because we don't generally let your cells should not generally get into here. If you damage your kidney, if you have really high blood pressure, you can blow out, the filtration membrane, and then you get blood in your urine. If you've been in a car accident, you've damaged your kidneys, you can also get blood in your urine. So that's a really bad sign to have red blood cells in your urine because it means that your kidney has been damaged. Okay, so this is a big table in your book that shows how GFR is regulated. And so we talked about autoregulation. So renal autoregulation would be right here, right, on this side, right? But we also have the nervous system and the hormones playing a role, okay? So we're going to talk about this part right here, which is not autoregulation, but it's extrinsic regulation of filtration rates, okay? So we'll talk about, just ignore that. We'll talk about extrinsic. Okay, so these are things that affect blood pressure. So when we talk about the nervous system, what part of the autonomic nervous system will, what do I want to say? Will connect to, that's not the word I want to say, but what part of the nervous system connects to the blood vessels and causes vasoconstriction and vasodilation? Is it parasympathetic or sympathetic? Sympathetic, right? So we have the sympathetic division. Innervate, that's what I wanted to say. So if you have more sympathetic, the sympathetic nervous system causes the blood vessels to be partially contracted at all times, and that's called tone, right? But when you need to have a boost of blood pressure, you can cause the release of epinephrine. So epinephrine particularly is a neurotransmitter, but also a hormone, right? But this causes vasoconstriction. And this is going to increase systemic blood pressure. Now, it does not regulate the blood vessels going to the kidney. So remember, the kidney has its own mechanism of regulating this. So it's not going to cause blood pressure to, or it's not going to vasoconstrict the blood vessels in the kidney. But what this is going to do, if you constrict blood vessels, this is going to increase the resistance, and more blood is going to flow to the kidney. So this increases resistance, and this resistance is called peripheral resistance. Okay. And this is going to increase blood flow to the kidney. And this is going to increase your glomerular filtration rate. Okay. So high blood pressure is not good for your kidney because it can damage the glomerulus. It can lead to kidney failure. Okay, so that's nervous system. We also have what is referred to as the renin, angiotensinogen, aldosterone mechanism. So we'll talk about the renin, angiotensinogen. This is the last thing we'll talk about today. Aldosterone mechanism. Okay, so these are all things that we talked about when we were talking about the nervous system and also the endocrine system. So this would be biology 232. We talked about these in detail. Okay. So if blood pressure is too low, so let's say systemic blood pressure is too low, right? The kidneys will release renin. Renin causes angiotensinogen. And where have you seen the inogen before? Inactive, right? So like pepsinogen. So angiotensinogen is always in our blood, but it is converted to angiotensin, and it's actually angiotensin 2. Right? So that's the renin. Right? Think about this word. Angio means blood vessels. Tensin means to tense, right? So this causes vasoconstriction. So this is going to do the same thing as the sympathetic nervous system. So it's going to cause the blood vessels to constrict, vasoconstriction. Okay. So that's going to increase GFR. Okay. Angiotensin, also causes the adrenal glands to release aldosterone. So aldosterone is a chemical, it's a hormone, it's a steroid, and it's actually called a mineral corticoid because it's made in the adrenal cortex. And so what this does is this causes more salt to be reabsorbed. So this is a mineral corticoid. It's a steroid hormone. It acts on the nephrons. To increase sodium reabsorption. Or it's not sodium, yeah, sodium chloride reabsorption. Right? So we reabsorb it, we put more salt into the blood. And so when salt moves, so does water. So kind of passively, water will move in the same direction as salt to kind of even out the osmotic concentrations, right? So water follows. Oops, water follows. So this increases blood volume. This increases blood pressure. And this increases GFR. Okay. Okay, so that would be hormonal mechanism. So I'm going to put here, this is a hormonal mechanism for GFR regulation.
Is it all of it? Like,
you know, I guess renin is also considered to be, it's kind of considered to be a hormone. Yeah, the whole thing you could say. So sympathetic, that would be the nervous system. This would be the hormonal, and these are both extrinsic compared to the autoregulation, which occurs due to stretching of muscles, but also due to the juxtaglomerulus apparatus, which is a sensory structure that sits right by your glomerulus and your tubules in your kidneys. Okay.
And that's intrinsic?
Those are intrinsic. So this would be intrinsic on this side. This is extrinsic. So here you can see sympathetic nervous system, vasoconstriction, right? Increase of systemic blood pressure. This would be the release of renin, angiotensinogen. These are all external, extrinsic regulation of GFR. Okay, so I'm going to stop there for today. And we're going to talk about next reabsorption and secretion. And then we'll talk about the special loop of Henle and how we can concentrate our urine. And I have, for those of you who came in a little late, your tests. Two. Jared.
yes.
She'll send it to me.
Hey, Michelle, we're gonna take a picture of your.
Yeah, I'll take a picture of your notes. And then I can airdrop you the. Yeah. I've never used it because it's honestly the best thing ever invented. After you use it, you're gonna be like, wow, best thing ever invented. So just turn it on to all. If you just slide it up. Oh wait, I haven't muted it up yet.
Yeah.
So.